Typically, the editing, the revising, the fixing takes twice as long as writing it down originally. The raw material can get flowing really fast and good, but it's terrible writing. And so I have to take a lot of time to organize it and shift it and move it around. But I don't mind that. I mean, my worst fear is the first part, is just having that blank piece of paper there. I can do a lot of editing on the computer. I hate computers, but I love word processing. And I think back on the days when I did my master's thesis and I wrote with carbon paper and typewriters, and one mistake and you had to do the whole page again, and oh my gosh, that was horrible. This is just, the technology for me is wonderful, and I am getting so I can move things around and I can use the computer a lot. So I don't really make hard copies till I'm way down the road.
The revision process isn't very long because I've been doing the revisions in my head generally. I find that writing fiction and versus nonfiction, the revision process is different. With fiction, I do spend a generous time revising, and then I workshop it. I take it to other people and I find out what they have to say, because it's all been in my head up until this point, so I need other people's opinions. So I have a writers group. I go to them when we talk about it, and then I go back and I revise again. And then maybe I send it to an editor, and the editor gives me more revisions. With nonfiction, I've been doing it for so long that I'm pretty practiced at it. I can just write something, go back through one time, check the grammar, and it's done. So it might take not very long, and the editors generally don't have any comments when I send it to them.
Since the advent of the word processor, I tend to revise as I go along. I write one section and then I read it through and I change it and I fix it all up. So by the end, I don't usually have a lot of revision after I reach the end. I actually read the stuff and look words up in the dictionary and stuff like that. So I've always taken great pride in my writing since from the age from being a kid. It's one of my things. I can write well, so I have I'm proud of it. So I do a good job. And you can be a very good scientist and a really poor writer, because it's like people who think in mathematics. They can't necessarily write. They understand the symbolic language of their field, but they don't know how to say it in English. I feel sorry for those people, but I do think it's learnable. I have students who say they can't write, and by the end, they're not great, but they're passable. You can learn how to do this.
Once I get feedback from somebody, I go through the third step of rewriting it in a way that's going to go out to the community. And again, before I send it out and publish it to several thousand people, I give it to somebody else to read, usually one of our English teachers.
I have a brother-in-law who's an attorney in Salt Lake who just writes and spills it all out and then comes back. And the law clerk that I have right now, that's more what she does. But the English major in me just can't do that. Really almost do a final draft as I go. And then we read it, we check it, and I'll fix a few things.
I spend hours. I go over and over. Now, each chapter separate. I can't even begin to tell you how many times it's over and over and over until finally, in my mind, it sounds like fine china. I go, bing, it's perfect. But then, rather than send it to a publisher, I always do two things first. One is I give it to my better in the field. So who's my better in church history? I love using Larry Porter, and I guess everybody else does too. But I give it to Larry and I say, what's wrong with this? Oh, anybody that gives you back something, smiling face, this is perfect, it's not worth it. The person that bleeds all over it is going to make this better. I get it back from him. It will always put me back into the library. I rewrite, and then the next thing I do is I give it to an editor type person. And the editor goes through and fixes was and were, is, whatever. And they go through, they make it perfect, and then I read it one more time myself, and then I send it to a publisher. The longer that I write, I have become my own editor. And there's the good and the bad on it, because it slows me down. I can't read an email without editing.
Oh, I show it to my wife, and she's a pretty tough critic, and so I show my work to my wife, and if sometimes she has really good ideas. Most of the time, she has really good ideas. When you're editing, and the product's going to be seen by the public, you better use spell check. No, really. It's important to use spell check, but then on top of that, because sometimes when you do spell check, I don't know if you've noticed this before, but sometimes there's a word that you spelled right, but it's not the right word. I think it's important to get it in front of as many eyes as you can, and get it in front of people that wouldn't be afraid to tell you what's wrong, and people that have no connection to what you're doing at all. And because those are the people that are going to be reading it. The very important thing about this editing process is don't let them get you off track of what you're doing, but take everything in stride and say, okay, this is great. I'm glad that these people gave me, great feedback, and always appreciate what they have to say, or else they won't do it for you next time.
I may not be the most qualified, but I am the one that has the final say, and so I will provide the final edits as well as the revisions that precede those edits, and it's my name that's signed to the report. In terms of the actual editing process and in terms of the details, punctuation, grammar, etc., I actually end up doing that. The associates that I work with have worked with me for a long enough time that they have adopted to a large extent my style. And they've brought their own style as well, though, to the process, which has improved it. And so there's not as much of the detailed editing that's required in terms of the punctuation and grammatical types of things. Mostly it's usage, it's sentence structure and that sort of thing, flow, organization of the report. That's mostly where the revision and editing is done.
Some people seem to have a natural gift for writing, and their initial offering is pretty stunning and coherent. Mine is usually disjointed and tangential, and so revising is the difference between any of my work seeing print or not. And I cannot revise usually with just my own vision, so to speak, although that's essential, obviously. But when I get feedback from other people is when I'm able to turn something from draft status or incomplete wanderings into something that really begins to make a point. I've been saved from myself more than once, that is, saved from poor writing, because of the willingness of other people to look at my work before I send it forward. And because of that, I've corrected a lot of mistakes that would otherwise have been probably pretty egregious if I'd sent it in. But people have been willing to work with me, and I think I've learned from what other people have to say enough that I'm in a position, I guess, where even when something is rejected, I can say, how could I make that better? And that's usually my goal. My goal, frankly, once I get, if I get a rejection of something or a please revise this, a request, and then I'll say, okay, what now? What now can I do to revise this? How can I make it better? It's a dead-end thing for me to say, oh, why me? Or ain't it awful? Or, well, that was wasted time. Writing is never wasted time. It's just the first step to getting to the next step where it's worth being published. And that's, to me, where I and all my colleagues have to go.